started shortly. Okay, I think we're all connected. Oh, let me close this other video screen. Sorry. We ran into some technical Zoom difficulties today, which was pretty amusing. Mitchell here was upside down, which I've never seen before, but we're back right side up. Hi, this is Jake Litke. I'm the CEO of MediaJel. Welcome to another episode of Cannabis Live and Cannabis Marketing Live. And today we're going to be talking about price wars and discounting. We have Mitchell here from Headset. Mitchell, maybe you could give just a brief introduction about yourself. I always like to start with how you ended up in the cannabis industry, and how you're finding it.
Yeah, totally. So I come from more of kind of a traditional tech background, being in the data science space. But when I saw this opportunity at Headset working in cannabis, this was a great intersection of both professional interest as well as personal interest. I love my job at Headset. I get to work with all this awesome data in this really budding industry of, this is really like chapter three of cannabis. It's so early. And so I love, having the access to all the data we have at Headset to kind of help guide other people in the industry, and help people see the picture about how things kind of are developing across the country, different regions, different states. But yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I'm excited to chat with you today. I spend a lot of time looking at data myself for our advertisers and analyzing sales purchase history and incrementality and things like that. But you have a probably a much broader view of the market because you are connected to approximate like how many systems, like how many retailers or brands are you collecting data from?
We connect directly through POS systems, retailers all across the country. It's thousands. I don't have the exact number on hand, but that's what's great about the data we get to work with is that it's coming directly from the source, and we have it in markets all across the U.S. and Canada. And so we built kind of a good macro view, and then in quite a few markets, a very good micro view of kind of what's playing out on the ground. But it's always great too, like talking to other people in the industry, because while I see it in the data, it's great to talk to like retailers and brands, because they intuitively know what's going on a lot more. And then I can kind of try to go sift through the data to try to justify it, from like a numerical or data focused standpoint.
Great. From a high level, we work with companies in multiple states, and we see some cycles repeating themselves. California and Colorado have been around for a long time. Those are relatively mature markets. You've got New Jersey and New York coming online more recently. Have you seen from a macro perspective? Um, Similar cycles? Have those timelines been compressed in newer states? We'll dive into details, but I kind of like to start with sort of macro. And the other thing you talk to someone in maybe in a specific state, and that state is struggling for whatever reason, and they've got a somewhat myopic view of the industry overall, and they think maybe everyone is, everything's terrible, but we know that there's success happening in some areas. So what is your if you're on, the CNN or whatever, say what's going on in the cannabis industry today from a macro level?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Is like each state very much plays out in kind of its own story. And while there is like cyclical things, like I was just writing an industry report about Connecticut. Connecticut, pretty new market, last 2.5 years, roughly. And there's kind of this blueprint to how like a market emerges now.
Hmm.
But as more and more states and markets come online, the way that they interact with each other also influences how things play out. So, like the blueprint of yesterday is not necessarily the blueprint of tomorrow. But you're totally right to say that like each state is its own kind of thing, and part of it is about how mature the market is, about what the state's been through, what the regulatory framework is, because that's different in absolutely every state. Um, just the geography that it exists in, West Coast markets, which is like pretty saturated versus Midwest and Northeast, which is kind of filling in. Um, so there's a lot of levers that kind of dictate things like price, the brands that are available, like your ability to be competitive, discounting. and people's ability to succeed in markets. Like if you talk to retailers in Missouri, their narrative around what's happening in Missouri is going to be very different than if you talk to someone in California. Um, but yeah, I mean that's the type of nuance that I love picking through and writing about with Headset. Is kind of just like what are those levers and how can you kind of try to get an understanding of where you're going from where you've been and where other people have been in order to kind of like mitigate risk or like play your hand in a certain way. Um, there's certain universals to all the business, but like I said, I mean, like we're saying, it's like each place is very much its own story.
All right. So let's start to dig into some numbers. And we're talking about discounts, which is everyone is doing discounts to some extent or another for different reasons. What are you seeing from a national average? If you just take all the sales happening in general, what is the average discount percentage and rate across sales that you're seeing?
So nationwide, it's like 23%. But it's pretty broad in terms of what you see at a state level. So it ranges all the way from like kind of early mid-teens to mid-30s, which is like super dramatic. If you're on the ground in like Arizona and you're seeing 35% on average versus, Oregon, which is a little more mild in the teens. Like that's a very big that's a big difference in like business conditions, right? From a retailer perspective. It is increasing in pretty much every market, though it's increasing like that increase, that year over year jump is actually like dissipating a little bit. So like in California, for example, 23 to 24 year over year, it was like a 40% increase in discount. And then it was 10% between 2024 and 2025. So while it's still increasing, it's kind of leveling out a little bit, which kind of reflects what we've seen a little bit with price too, where like the big storyline of like a couple years ago was like price was just crashing everywhere. And um it's still declining, but we've kind of seen it like that graph tail off a bit. So we're kind of seeing something happen similar with discounting, but I wouldn't expect that increase to just stop anytime soon. There's obviously a limit to how much you can discount. And maybe that was the situation with prices. You started to approach that limit and it couldn't go further. But especially in newer markets, like places like Connecticut, which I mentioned, or Missouri, it's like that will likely be something that picks up over time as competition increases.
Yeah, and then when we talk about discounts, and we're talking about percentages. The another important variable is it's a percentage of what, right? Because you can obviously raise your
Yep,
prices and then discount them down. So if you look at the actual, like, take some basic benchmarks like the cost of an eighth of flour or the cost of a gram cartridge in real dollars, what do you see from a pricing trend? So like net of discounts. Um, how do you see is that well again we'll talk about national and then we can talk about some individual states because I know for example like Michigan edibles are like less than half the price of what they are in California, right?
definitely, definitely.
So in real dollars, as they say when they talk about inflation, um, what are you seeing from a retail price that the consumer is paying over time, like 2 years ago to last year to this year for some of those staples?
Yeah, so the discounting metric that we're looking at is like what's the average discount per on average basket, right? And when we're talking about basket size, that's the amount that a person spent, like your average customer spent at your dispensary or dispensaries within the state. And then what was the discount levied against that? So when we're saying 23% off, that's 23% off total basket, which at a national level is about $50. Obviously, that ranges a lot per state depending on prices. Um,
You're saying the national basket average is $50 out the
the
door?
is about $50, yeah. So
Okay.
that's pre-discount, or no, post-discount pre-tax. Um, so after the discount's been applied, you're at about $50 is the basket size.
Are you able to track? I know some people do like tax included as their discount. Is that factored in when you think about discounts? I don't know how they do it from a POS perspective, but it's effectively they're, subsidizing the cost of the tax. I've seen that done as well.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have like the transparency into that. How we choose to do our calculations is pre-tax, or yeah, pre-tax. But so we see more it being used as a mechanism to drive traffic and increase transaction as opposed to like offsetting taxes, especially in places where it's like you have super high taxes like California, which has I think it's like a 19% excise tax, give or take a couple percentage points. Um, but generally we try to just calculate it in a manner that normalizes it across markets because there's a variety of tax rates.
And are you able to see things like where there's an offer, it's, buy this and get a pre-roll for a penny or something, is I
Not
don't
so
know.
much the specific transactions, it's more of the rate, or the specific promotions, I should say. Like the information I've obtained around how people promote is based upon more anecdotally or how I shop. Like that's something I pay keen attention to here in California. I also have a lot of experience in Washington's market, with kind of just trying to see like what types of promotions are people running, and then how does that fit in with kind of the model that I've crafted for myself as I'm sifting through the data in all these markets. Like one thing that's interesting around style of promotion is like in places like Colorado that have like a pretty low average discount rate, about 15%, they have a much stricter regulations around what you're allowed to do as far as promoting your product.
Mhm.
So like a billboard that says, I mean, like billboards are much harder to even put in Colorado versus California because of the restrictions around what type of you have to like guarantee a certain percentage of the audience of that promotion is going to be within legal age.
71.6 something percent.
Exactly. It's kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know if that's an arbitrary number or how they arrived at that. But I think that really does affect in the way the types of promotions that people run.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think in general, is like people try to, this is something that we focus on is it's like people use it as a mechanism to generate traffic, but then also is it's like, are you creating an opportunity for yourself and for customers too when you're like designing the actual promotion? So yeah.
And do you see data on um, the rate of discounting for new customers versus returning customers? Do you have that level of information?
We do have that level. I haven't done a like in-depth analysis into like a first timer discount. We have like information around how like your like what percentage of your customer base are repeat and how much of that ultimately influences your revenue. But we just haven't dove into like the first timer discounts, because a lot of places, like we all know, kind of offer that initial like, oh, everything's 50% off since it's your first time. That's obviously like a customer acquisition tool. Have a good positive first experience, they keep coming back. So that's kind of like the front line of discounting, but then it goes deeper than that too in terms of like how you choose to bundle things, the type of promotions that you choose to offer. But yeah.
That makes sense. Now, when it comes to discounting strategy, and let's talk about retailers for now, and then we can move on to brands after that. But for retailers, you see a lot of first time discount. Frequently, if you've got like a retention campaign going, people will offer discounts to lapsed customers or credits. Um, do you see that? I guess we'll start with what is the range from lowest to highest for the states? Like, do you have a ranking of, whatever it is has the highest, very highest rate of discount versus lowest?
Definitely. I have all that actually right in front of me. Arizona is the highest at 35%, and we have Massachusetts at the lowest at about 12%. And that's definitely shaped a lot by kind of what we're talking about is those macro market conditions. Arizona's market's contracting in a pretty big way. And so I think just the competitive pressure, that's affecting every single retailer in the state of Arizona. Washington also has a high rate, also contracting market. And so that as that sales, that monthly sales total goes down, that's ultimately going to affect the bottom line of pretty much every retailer. So then it gets into a race of trying to make that up through traffic. And that's like the number one way in which people are using discounting. I see a lot of blanket discounting, or especially in advertisements, and that's very much attracting people, trying to boost the number of transactions, which is kind of like the most obvious way to increase revenue and make up for some of that gap that you're seeing when you're losing just like overall market value in a place like Arizona. Um, Massachusetts, which is on the lower end of the spectrum, that's a much more stable market. It's very mature. It's in a region that previously did not have a lot of access to cannabis. So, like, we also see this in Missouri, also 16% average discount rate per basket. Both of those places have benefited by kind of being the first in that realm in geography to offer access to cannabis. And so they have a lot of pent up demand and also demand coming from out of state, which allows them to uh like not have to run those types of promotions that Arizona does because the demand is still strong. The sales is growing. The sales are growing. Um, and so you can kind of see the direct effect that that has on a market's discounting habits. Um, it's like in some situations, it's like retailers start to feel desperate, and the quickest way to try to feel like they're seizing control of their shrinking revenue is to try to bring in more people. And discounting seems like the most obvious tool to do it.
Do you see trend lines that correlate between when a retailer increases their overall discount rate and sales volume going up? How often does that work?
I think I don't necessarily have the numbers on that in front of me, but what we see really often is that you may see that the number of transactions going up, but you're also eroding your profit per unit. So if you're not raising the amount of units that you are relative to the amount that you're losing through discounting, then you maybe captured a bigger number, that at the end of the day that revenue number is bigger, but you've eroded your margins past a point that is not profitable, because things like your fixed costs, whether it's your rent, your payroll, that's all staying the same. um, and you really are trying to elicit a behavior that either buoys or grows basket size through things like increasing number of units per basket. So it's like the idea of offering a discount shouldn't be just to get people in the door, but it's also to try to influencing purchasing behaviors, whether it's buying a more expensive item or buying more items. So, as we see price decline, basket size naturally going to decline, discounting affecting price. But then can you get that units per basket up, which will ultimately kind of like in a proportional manner that helps kind of keep that basket size in a healthy level. You don't want to just like give everything away.
Yeah, so what would a good formula for a retailer to think about as, because I think sometimes people aren't diving too deep into the data, and they're saying, oh, our top line revenue went up, our margin might have gone down, but is there a relatively straightforward formula to say, okay, well, for every percent that you're going, or 10% or whatever it is that you're going to offer as discount, it's not necessarily that you need 10% more sales, right? Because
Mhm.
the basket item itself counts. So if you say average basket is $50, right? And you're offering a 20% discount on average, so you lose $10 off of your top line, which if you're operating at, let's say, a 50% cost of goods, that's actually 20% of your margin.
Mhm.
So if you're trying to make the decision, and we talk to retailers about this, where they're going to do a promo, they're going to advertise it, and the question is, what should we do? What should it be? 15, 20, 25, 30? We see data from an advertising perspective that once you get to like 30%, people really start paying attention.
Mhm.
25% it goes 20. Once you go under 20, it starts to not be quite as effective. And then the other thing that we've seen is doing discounts on a dollar amount versus a percentage.
Right.
And in that sense, a dollar amount for lower basket item, or like lower average order value stores, sometimes mentioning a specific dollar amount can be more powerful than a percentage because people, when you get into smaller basket sizes, the percentages seem less compelling psychologically for some people.
Right. Yeah, I
Uh,
don't think there's necessarily a formula that's one size fit all, but I think you're describing definitely the thought process that needs to go into how you're running a discount. One that's kind of based on like agreeing what those top line metrics are for that we're looking at that shows success. And a lot of times, when I'm looking at baskets all the time. And as I'm running promotions, if you can kind of um, separate out and test those promotions and whether it's influencing the amount of items what is your goal with the discount? Is your discount to try to upsell someone? Is it to try to cross sell someone? And if that's the case, is it's like, are you seeing a meaningful increase in the basket size from that time or the number of items they purchased? And I think you also touch on a really important part, which is like personalization, is like understanding people's purchasing behaviors because there's an archetype for every person that walks into a dispensary in terms of what type of promotion would actually be appealing to them. So like as a someone running a business and you're like, okay, I'm really trying to, the people who are generate the most sales for a dispensary, we did an analysis, maybe 6 months ago that was your top 20% of customers at a retailer, it can make over 50% of generate over 50% of your revenue, right? Those people are very responsive towards value. That's potency, that's price. And so the type of deal that you're going to use to try to target them if you want to increase output from that specific group is maybe it's an upsell. It's like, hey, you buy a half an ounce every time here, but we know a popular segment right now is popcorn nug flour. So you can give them a 15% discount on an ounce of that. It's still like maybe $10 more than that $50 half ounce that you were going to buy. And so you've succeeded and they feel like they've got more value because they got a higher quantity and you've gotten a better value. And they also feel like they've gotten a perceived discount on a higher quantity piece or a higher ticket piece. And then you've also achieved in kind of lifting them to a higher margin product, either a higher margin product or just like a higher revenue or profit, total profit, gross profit product. And this changes, that's just one customer type. How you deal with the kind of curious crowd, how you deal with the older crowd. They have different behaviors. People who buy certain categories also are very likely to buy others in some cases. And so understanding kind of all that consumer behavior helps you craft those fine tune promotions and then ultimately just testing them. Hey, we're running this promotion, this variation of this promotion on Tuesday this week. Very next Tuesday, run the exact same promotion and maybe it's changing just one thing. And then going back and see that did we achieve those metrics in either upselling, which was maybe the goal is like to get someone to buy a pre-roll, add on a pre-roll. Did we achieve that goal over that, that week one versus week two? And that's how you can take like a really targeted approach, I think, to strategically applying a discount where it's not just eroding margin unnecessarily.
yeah. You mentioned correlation between product types. Do you have data points on people that buy vapes buy more edibles, or what kind of correlation do you see?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have all sorts of data like that in terms of what types of people prefer, but then when it comes to like what types of products appear in each basket, like flour, for example. Flour, when people purchase flour, typically they're just going to purchase flour. They're maybe 15% of the time they might purchase a pre-roll, but typically it's just going to be flour. When someone purchases a beverage, more often than just purchasing beverage, they will purchase a edible as well. So that's like a very clear opportunity to try to um, elicit that behavior from the customers. Like we already know there's a pre-existing connection between people who are going to buy a beverage and an edible. Same thing with if you buy edibles, or all wellness products is a good example. There's a 30% chance that if you purchase a wellness product, you're going to be purchasing an edible as well, because there's an overlap between edibles as both a wellness category as well as a recreational category. So again, it's like a good opportunity for a promotion where it's like you're purchasing edibles. Maybe you're an older customer, you're using this for a wellness purpose. We know maybe you'd be interested in this tincture. Tinctures, at least the ones I purchase, are like notoriously expensive, $90 to $100. Say you give them, 15% off on that $100 tincture. Already those things are purchased at a high rate in tandem. But then, they're getting a deal on that tincture, that high price item, and you're upselling to a higher price item, and they feel like they're getting a deal on it too. So it's kind of mutually beneficial in that way.
Okay. Um, let's talk about what you would do. Let's say you owned Mitchell's Fine dispensary in three different scenarios. One is the contracting market. I think you mentioned Washington as a contracting market. You have a fair amount of experience there. A stable, established market, and then a new market. How would you think about you're planning Q4, and you have those three different market conditions. How different would you approach a discounting strategy in those markets?
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously the contracting market is under a lot more pressure to preserve margins. And so I think that's where like the operational efficiency of the discounting, you're kind of going to have to discount at whatever the normalized rate is, for the customer acquisition side of things. Now, some types of customers are more focused on discounts than others. But especially for that large group that's going to generate the most of your sales, you have to be competitive with what the market's laying out as far as discounting. Now, what I wouldn't do is, I went into a store the other day and I think there was a sign that was 50% off the entire store, and it was showed each day of the week. Or it's 50% off BOGO or something each day of the week. That's something I wouldn't do, because you're kind of you need to go a level deeper. And that comes to like really understanding your customers, and like when do you have to use discounting as a way to even get them in, like that more like kind of curious crowd are not nearly as reactive towards discounting as the frequent customer. um so like myself, for example, I usually know specifically what I want when I go to a dispensary. I'm going based upon convenience and location, if they're
Mhm.
carrying what I want. If I go in and I get a discount, great. But like I didn't need to get that discount to get what I want. I'm price flexible. Um, I'm going for a specific product. I will pay 60 for getting what I want versus 30 if it's a 50% off entire store, entire product, right? So kind of understanding like the composition of your customer base is super important when you're doing that. I think, in places like Missouri, right, that have less of that competitive pressure, this would be the scenario of um, like developing market that's still growing, is you can use some of those blanket discounting as a way of, or kind of those like flashy discounts or big discounts as a way of customer acquisition, because people are still shuffling into position as far as like getting your brand name out there, getting your store known within like the local environment. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like don't give away more than you necessarily need to. um and yeah, be intentional. It's like, do you have high profit margin products? Well, put that discount rate on the lower, or on the lower margin product, in a way that promotes the higher margin upsell. Um, And like that can be a mechanism to try to like increase that revenue in a way that's like competitive and not, I don't know, just like giving away everything. It's like you kind of got to go a level deeper.
Yeah, so that approach might be counterintuitive to some people. So let's walk through the math on that, right? You have two products, one has high margin, one has low margin. One might intuitively think, well, I want to discount the higher margin product because I have more margin to lose on that. But if you're talking about on a percentage basis of the total product price, the margin and the actual cost of the product start to make a big difference as well, right?
Right.
Because 20%, if you already only have 30% margin on something that's $50 versus $100, the amount of real dollars that are changing when you apply that can be different. So your approach is discount the lower price or the lower margin product when you feel like you've got a correlation take the tinctures, for example, right? I don't know what the margin is on average on a tincture.
Right.
But gummies tend to have pretty high margin depending on how they're being produced. Um, and you know that they're purchased together. So you offer, in this scenario, you put, let's say you decide you have to do a 23% discount because that's what market is. Would you put the discount on the tincture or the gummy?
To be honest, that's the designing the promotion isn't necessarily my area of
Yeah.
specialization. It's more about trying to elicit a behavior, right? Are you trying to, in a manner of like cross-selling and upselling?
Yeah, I
So,
didn't mean like which one is going to be more effective. Let's take that out of it from a marketing perspective. I just
mhm.
meant just talking about margin, right? For a business, if they have two products, they think they're going to be sold together, people are going to come in the door. From just a pure margin perspective, how does the math work better or worse if they're discounting the lower margin versus the higher margin product?
Um, to be honest, is I don't have a ton of experience on playing out those exact scenarios, so I wouldn't want to
Yeah,
necessarily
sorry. I'm
speak
throwing all
on
kinds of
something I'm
questions
not.
at you that you probably didn't expect. So,
Well, no, I think, and that's a really good question, right? And it's like, no, I think like an inventory manager, right, would probably have a better sense on what makes sense in that regard. But then, yeah, just my perspective is more of applying like trying to focus in on like what type of product are we trying to sell a specific type of product, and then crafting a scenario which would be like best suited for that product based upon what you know about the type of customers that either are going to purchase that, um, which I could speak to a little more in terms of people's like consumption patterns or what age groups buy. And this kind of comes more into like sales training again, which I'm not an expert in, but there's a lot of room I think for retailers to improve in that experience in terms of like getting the right product and the right promotion to the right type of customer based upon just asking simple questions. A lot of people come in, they know what they want. It's not going to be like, hey, let me help you. Like, are you interested in this? But there are some simple opportunities. When we look at like attachment rates of um, when people buy an edible, like I think it's um, like 25% of the time they also buy a pre-roll. So it's like, are you even giving that option at the end? It's like maybe you have a end cap right by the register that's like, hey, so you're buying, do make sure your sales staff is armed with the knowledge that it's like, hey, if someone's buying beverage or edibles, are you guys looking for something to smoke on too? These are 15% off. Maybe that's a product that you're trying to push because it's either there's some types of sales advantage to you guys. Either you're trying to get rid of stale inventory or it has advantageous margin. Um, but yeah, it's about kind of understanding preferences, trends. Someone who's also interested in like a value based product. So like cheapest, highest potency, um, like flour, right? It are also interested in like connoisseur pre-rolls, right? So keef or infused pre-rolls, right? That's an opportunity for an upsell as well. And a promotion that kind of packages that the behavior for that specific customer archetype.
okay. You mentioned a couple things I want to dig in on, and just for those of you that are in the Zoom stream, there is a Q&A thing, so you can type in some questions if you have some questions for Mitchell. I will continue to pepper him with questions that he may or may not be prepared for, regardless. You mentioned beverages a couple times.
Yep.
Beverages, it's a big topic, and not a lot of people have the view that you do across the market. So. Let's talk about beverages in terms of which states you're seeing the most adoption, and then also as that correlates to kind of overall sales, and if you see some areas, moving faster than others.
Yeah, so we have quite a bit of information on beverages. This is, like you said, obviously a big topic. When journalists reach out to us, they're oftentimes asking for data specifically around beverages. Why? Because I think people a lot of times recognize the parallel that beverages have with the alcohol industry and the opportunity that it presents to kind of like seep into the mainstream. What we're seeing though is beverages actually make up a pretty small percentage of total sales, somewhere in like 1.5% of total sales, broken down by category. And it is increasing, although at a modest rate. And most of that increase is coming from kind of high potency beverage category, on shelves in California, that the 100 milligram beverages, single serving, are the ones that are seizing more and more market share. And then, kind of with this introduction of kind of hemp derived market, which nobody can ignore at this point, is a lot of that lower dose stuff, which was previously trying to find its way in the dispensary, is really kind of finding its way more into the traditional retailer environment. And both because that kind of meets that customer base who's maybe the kind of curious crowd who's a little more interested in that type of product, and as is true with also the high potency beverage in the dispensary model as well. So I think it's kind of tough to try to mix and match those right now. There's no data that really indicates that it's about to pop off in the dispensary model, though it is growing incrementally. So it kind of just depends what your state's environment is, and then also what type of product you want to put onto the market. Like I was looking at Connecticut, we just published an industry report about them, and they allow both hemp-derived beverages with a maximum of 3 milligrams in non-dispensary retailers. And then also in the dispensary model, they don't allow high potency beverages. So that makes it difficult for beverages to succeed in kind of that regulated adult use space in a market like that. In places like California, they don't allow hemp derived beverages in retailers that you see in other types, other states, like whether it's like a Total Wine and More type scenario.
Yep.
Um,
They used
though
to have
we,
them at the Total
yeah,
Wine down the street from my house, and they do not anymore. Did you see, just anecdotally, was there any kind of sales lift in California for dispensaries when hemp products got taken off the shelf and technically banned from shipping?
I didn't necessarily look into that at the time. I would imagine you probably could see a little blip in the data. It is like because the share of that category is so small, you'd really need to kind of magnify it a bit. But yeah, I mean that is a really big conversation that's happening right now that nobody can ignore. Is how does this regulated adult use dispensary model that we've kind of become used to in a lot of states fit in tandem with this emerging hemp derived market, which in a lot of places is exceeding the size of this kind of dispensary model. So, depending on your category, if you're like edible or beverages, the reality is the venue may not be right depending on what type of product that you're crafting. And if you are crafting something for a California dispensary, know that the type of product that is generating the growth is really high potency products. It's not necessarily targeted to that much larger group of like kind of mild social consumption. Like, there was a brand Can that it's about, 2.5 milligrams. And it very much promotes as like, oh, take it to the beach, to the cookout. Like that crowd has struggled to kind of get engaged, I feel like, in California. Washington would be the biggest market for beverages like that. Their beverage share, though, is still under 4%. So, um, in the 3, 4 years that I've been tracking beverages, there hasn't been a lift in the way that we see like explosive growth in pre-rolls or explosive growth in vapor pens as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. We got a couple of questions here. Mark is asking, have there been any markets that were successful in weaning the customer off of a heavy discounting cadence? If so, do we know what their strategy was?
The only markets where I've seen it kind of backtrack, the most recent one would be Missouri. And that's not so much based upon a strategy that they adopted, but it's more of it's just market conditions. They have their total sales, monthly sales, and annual sales is still increasing, which puts less pressure. Like when the demand's still strong, it puts less pressure on them to increase in a way that you see in Arizona because that demand's cooling off big time, and so they're kind of it's almost a move out of desperation. So that's why kind of when I was talking about for the markets that are kind of dealing with a contracted market, your efforts are best spent in operational efficiencies, whether it's promotions in a way that optimizes the benefit that you get for it, and while also balancing what is needed to maintain the customer and acquire new customers. And then also like there's tons of ways to improve things like inventory management, something that Headset works on a lot. It's just that and this is what I talk to reporters a lot about and people who are working in the space. It's like you got to instill really positive business practices in traditional consumer packaged goods or into traditional retail outlets. Like they're definitely studying promotional um, campaigns to understand what is the most efficient. And I think cannabis at times, because of the newness of the nature of the businesses, while people have a lot of industry expertise and maybe product expertise, not as much business acumen. And in a place like California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, places which are more mature markets and are going through contractions, the you have to build a very solid business foundation. A time will come back where maybe regulation loosens or additional opportunities present themselves like interstate commerce, which will kind of shake up the economic levers about flow of demand. Also a crackdown on illicit market that would also very much benefit the state of California. But until then, the way that you can best preserve yourself and work to grow in the future is just instilling really strong business practices in the state of Missouri. This is I kind of feel like sometimes they're like, oh man, everything's all gravy over here. We're doing so good. We're expanding that. And it's a cautionary tale of what's happening in some of these other states of don't overextend yourself. You need to instill some of these really positive business practices and surround your operation with people who have strong business acumen to ultimately build a business that's going to last. Um, so unfortunately, I don't think I have like a like an example I can point to of someone where it's like they all got together and decided we're moving this from 23 to 13. Um,
I think that's actually illegal, but uh,
yeah, definitely.
I think that's called price fixing, but I'm not sure. Now, even in California, where there's been like a pretty big washout in terms of retailers or even regionally, do you ever see? I don't have any data. This is sort of an anecdotal theory that I have, which is that when you have operators that may not be following normal best practices and or are desperate, that are just throwing out larger and larger discounts, it makes it harder for other businesses to not do the same thing. And so later stage markets like California, have you seen any sort of movement in terms of, okay, now that instead of there's less dispensaries now than there was before,
Mm.
right? So when there is less competition in an area, is there a direct correlation to being able to ease off of discounting? Or have we not seen that happen yet anywhere?
Well, I can't say definitively, but I would say there's a lot of evidence in California to that being the case. It's like California's kind of gone through some aches and pains, and like you said, is that the amount of dispensaries that are around has been trimmed down to what kind of the evolving market can support. And in return, you have a slower increase in discount that went from 40 a year prior to
Mhm.
now only 11 this past year. And then
Wait, are you
also
saying that the discount rate went from 40 to 11?
the increase in discount rate.
The increase.
So
So it
it
went up
jumped
for,
40% in between 23 and 24. And between 24 and 25, it jumped 11%,
okay.
which is an encouraging sign that like it's at least moving towards stability. That has also kind of been seen, like I was explaining before, in price compression. Also, like the fact that California is at 21 in August of this year, 21.6% is the average discount per basket. And like we said, Washington's dealing with 35%. So when you're kind of considering that relative to kind of whatever other waypoints we have to chart where California is at in regard to rampant discounting, it's actually doing better than a lot of places, including places like Michigan. I mean, Michigan is a whole other like anomalous beast, but that's a place that doesn't have a trouble with demand, but still is under competitive pressure to apply significant discounts to try to like bring people in. And they have like unlimited license scheme, I'm pretty sure there, which just only grows that competitive pressure. And kind of as you alluded, is there's a washout. It's like people who are throwing out crazy discounts. Sometimes that's a move of desperation, and like don't get caught up in trying to keep up with that. If you're doing the work to like solidify things like inventory management, strategic promotions, and staying in touch with your top customers, like that's like another thing where um, if you have someone, it's like one of the modules in our free retailer tool is like customer segmentation. There's a cannot lose group where it shows you like your top customers. And if someone's spending $1,000 to $2,000 at your dispensary a month, you bet I would have someone call them up. Hey, we got this new product in that we know you like. We're running a promotional thing. If you're interested, if you want to try this new thing ahead of time, like those are all opportunities I think to like focus more on like the customers you do have. Um, and yeah, the type of stuff that we're trying to instill in retailers, especially if they're kind of new to just like running a small or medium business.
Okay. I've got another question here, and I don't know if you have the data for this or not. Do you know the margin that people have? Even, well, I'll give you the question, and you can see if you can answer it. The question is, do you have a profile of an ideal customer and basket makeup that tends to be the most profitable customer for a retailer? So, like a customer whose basket is 60% one product, 40% another. Um, that was the question.
Yeah, this it's not something I have on hand. It's something that like Headset is designed to do, or like business intelligence tools is like you put in your specific market, you can kind of filter to kind of see what is it's more of not what is the ideal, but it's what it looks like in the industry. So you can kind of chart your progress relative to that. I don't have those numbers on hand though, honestly.
Yeah. So, but you do have the tools to be able to figure that out, right? So
We
you,
Definitely. I mean, obviously, like that's a huge part of people. People need to know where they sit relative. It's visibility. It's people need to know where they sit relative to where they're doing business and what's actually reasonably obtainable. But yeah, like margin stuff can be a little difficult for me to answer just because it can kind of be all over the board, and I don't work directly in like micro analyzing inventory. I zoom out a little more on kind of overall market performance and um, category trends, product trends, demographic information, stuff like that is kind of my super area of expertise.
but you could answer that question with your market level data and say, here is what are common basket combinations, right? Like people buy these type of things together. And then the retailer could look at their own margins and say, how can I put together discounts or offers or whatever it is that will appeal to people that buy both of those products. And then you could start to do the next step of it, which is okay, where do we apply the discount? Do we apply it
Mhm.
to this product or that product? Which one is the pull and which one is the attach, right? Meaning
Mhm.
like they come in for this and they're likely to buy this other thing.
Right. Yeah, like I said, all those tools exist within headset. I just don't necessarily have those in front of me. We do have information in terms of like the when it comes down to like what a good basket looks like relatively, like I said, it's 50 at the national level for various markets. That is let's see if I have that in front of me. For the units per basket, that's about 2.7. The only anomalous one in there, and everyone kind of hovers around that range, but the really anomalous one is Michigan, where it's 6, which is crazy. Um, and I
But
think
is
that's
the basket size still the same?
uh
For like dollars, right? So six products, but are they buying six pre-rolls?
yeah, that's a great question.
Right?
I thought I included basket size per market. I don't have that in front of me right
Yeah.
now, but definitely something to look at. That's a good example of like you got to balance the scales. Is if your basket size is in the lower 25% of the country, but then your units per basket is sky high, it's like that's not really a balanced scale.
Yeah, so we got another question here. We're getting close on time. Other than discounts or price, what are you seeing as top purchase drivers for consumers? I'm not sure if yeah,
Well, what was the first thing? It was price and what
well,
was
yeah,
it?
so if we take discounts or just is it value, right? Is it
Oh,
cheap? Is it
yeah.
what other things do you have any kind of data on that would help someone understand what are purchase drivers for consumers? What makes people purchase?
Uh, the number one thing is potency and price. Those are the two elements of value. Like I mentioned with beverages, what buoys that category is high potency beverages. What buoys pre-rolls and has fueled that growth over the last 3 years is connoisseur infused pre-rolls. And really, and that is the crowd that's most sensitive to discounting. So like on 710, looking through that, it's like people really were shopping for the best deals on concentrates. And I mean, even knowing that, how you run your deals for 710 is completely different than how you run them for 420 that attracts a much broader market. Um, but yeah, I mean, potency is the big one. I think another thing that's more emerging that because that's another thing that's big in the news right now. We recently published a blog on it with like potency by data. If you want to go look at that, it breaks down each market and the trends behind that. But it's uh, trying product development is so based around potency at the moment. There are signs of brands that are really successful, like Camino, that do effects driven marketing for their products. So they're still in that low dose category of anywhere from 2 to 10 for edibles, but they're working with CBG, CBN, THCV. This is true with beverages. They're finding their way more and more into those products. And that captures a totally different market of people who are maybe at that maybe more connoisseur type. Like they understand these terms, they understand the effects. Like when they're even using cannabis, it's not about necessarily like they understand the nuance of effect. And so that's a group that I think can continue to be engaged with like in a very profitable manner.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a good point. That's a good thing to take away. When you're going in, like I like THCV products, right? So if I'm going to go into a dispensary, at that point, the price is kind of irrelevant, right? Because there's only going to be a handful of products, and then it's going to come down to which brand do I like. And that is a way to bypass the discounting because you're appealing to a different value that the consumer wants. They're not just trying to like how many milligrams of THC can I get for how few dollars. I'm looking for something that makes me feel like this, and
totally.
that really changes the calculus in terms of what your competitive landscape looks like on the shelf.
Right. And so like the number one thing is that value and potency. Like the second largest flower segment right now after hybrid is popcorn
Yeah.
hybrid. and that's because that's a cheaper product, right? So that's going to be your number one answer. However, Jake, I think you're illustrating it like with both your preferences. Those are also my preferences too, of people who are very cannabis literate, but maybe are not optimizing for price and potency. Is there's kind of, do you have stuff on your shelves that is also targeted towards this very cannabis literate, interested, consistent user, and also you are willing to pay a higher price for what you want. That is a group that I think is untapped, and I also think is very profitable. One that I think people have been trying to make work for a long time is the Canna Curious crowd. Is like really bring in like the soccer mom type and have like that um that crowd, which is a much larger body area for potential and area for growth. But we just haven't really seen that manifest in like significant amount of sales. And especially with kind of the hemp derived market coming online, even my neighbor who, lives here in California, he, though you can't access it through a channel like Tonal Wine and More, he's ordering hemp derived beverages to his house. So you're still competing against that market. So if you're trying to diversify who you're trying to attract to, I would play more into that cannabis literate, but um, maybe I like to use the word connoisseur a little more because they're like, really exploring products. And those are the brands, the way they market, whether it's like, here are all your terpene profiles, here's all the test results. Like that's the type of stuff I gravitate towards. Um, and I think there's a lot of room to expand that.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time. I'll just say, on that sort of effects driven, consistent type of thing that people are looking for, right? As you're saying, the cannabis literate. Um, and the opportunity for growth there is to create more of those people, right? The Canna Curious crowd is way too large of a bucket. It basically is people who don't smoke weed a lot, right?
Yeah,
So if when you try to attack a broad market like that, you're not going to be successful unless you break it down into cohorts and give them a value proposition that they're interested in. I forget what movie it was, but like McDonald's or Starbucks succeeds because they deliver a consistent experience, right? That they found people that like that. It's also widely available. But if there's not very many of the people that are looking for those effect-driven products, I think the goal as a brand in this case is to find people to turn into those customers, right? That they're just not aware that these effects are can be prescriptive and controlled, and it does interest a different type of consumer. So
right. I think that's amazing insight. Like it's still very new, but that's honestly where you can I think oftentimes those people tend to spend more too because they are interested in that regard or in those elements of cannabis. And so there's an educational component that goes alongside that, which is something that your business or sales staff or whatever can kind of help promote and build an identity around.
yeah, you could probably just not discount that at all. So if you want to get away from discounting,
I totally agree. I
find
totally
or build customer bases that are looking for a specific product rather than just value. All right, we're over on time. Thank you so much for all of your data points. Sorry for asking you questions that you didn't have answered.
That's totally okay.
Um, but how can people get a hold of you? It sounds like there's lots of great information on the headset site that's freely available. Um, if people are not familiar, tell us a quick minute about headset.
Yeah, headset. We're building products to help their cannabis businesses run better. We have a free retailer tool that kind of gives you insights into sales and your employees and all that stuff. We have an insights tool that allows you to explore a lot of these, like your brand performance relative to the market and other brands, and delivers a lot of these like consumer trends that I kind of talked about a little bit, as well as vendor managed inventory. That's the one that people are really kind of focusing on these days, is automating a lot of that relationship between vendors and retailers to try to eliminate stockouts, stuff like that. And if you want to find more information, Headset, LinkedIn is a good follow. I'm always trying to publish like little data tidbits that show highlight different markets. Also, just the resources tab on headset.io has industry reports on various markets, blog posts, and also we have category reports too. So a lot of good free information out there as well.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time today. Appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for having me.